Welcome to Unmasked, where we take off the filters and get real about faith, failure, and finding freedom. I'm your host, Wesley Farnsworth, a dad, veteran, author, and a man who's learned that God does his best work in the middle of our mess. Each episode will have honest conversations with people who have walked through addiction, pain, or doubt, and with pastors, leaders, and everyday believers who are learning to live and lead authentically. So take a breath, pull up a chair, and let's get real. This is Unmasked. Today on Unmasked, I'm joined by Mike Smith, a man whose life journey embodies what redemption really looks like. Mike has walked through the darkest corners of addiction, mental illness, and chaos, yet he stands today as a passionate advocate for recovery, mental health, and hope. His story isn't polished or sanitized. It's a real, gritty, grace-filled path of someone who's been to the gutter and found God waiting with open arms. Now a writer and mentor to veterans and helping others battle their own storms, Mike uses his testimony to remind people that no matter how shattered life feels, there is always a way back home. His heart for the broken comes from lived pain. His authority comes from lived transformation. And his message is simple. God's grace doesn't just rescue, it rebuilds. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today on Unmasked.
You're very welcome, Wesley. I'm thrilled to be here. We got a chance to chat a little bit before the show started, and I'm just wanting to kind of share my testimony, like you were talking about there, and say, how grace really has shown itself in my life, and God is so good and faithful. When I thought that, he had given up on me, God doesn't give up on his people. He loves them, and that's the whole reason that I'm here today, is to share that message.
Yeah, I love that. As you just said, we had a chance to talk beforehand, and man, to you listeners, like the stuff that he was sharing with me before we started recording today's podcast episode was just powerful of how God's moving in his life, and I can't wait to be able to share it with you all. So, Mike, why don't we just jump in, and why don't you give us your background, where you've come from, and where you are now, and how God's brought you to here, and
Yeah,
we'll go from there.
absolutely. Well, I guess it all started, growing up in Sauk Center, Minnesota. I was born in Aberdeen, but I don't remember living in South Dakota much. My family moved when we were 2 or 3, and I didn't know until much later in life that, my family, which has myself and 4 siblings, and my dad and mom, were having all this stress with the 5 kids at home. And so when I was really little, my dad tried to commit suicide. And like I said, I was sheltered from that truth for many years. But so when I was like 3 years old, we moved to Sauk Center, and I grew up in Sauk and had fond memories of it with my brother and I hunting gophers and doing that Minnesota thing and going to the lakes and fishing and, having a great time just as a kid growing up in central Minnesota. Pretty sheltered life. But the one thing that was constant was that my mom and dad would always be arguing over the fact that we didn't have a lot of money, and so my mom would fill in and do like some substitute school teaching type jobs, and my dad was the manager of the J.C. Penney clothing store. So kind of going out of childhood, moving forward in time, when I was 12 years old, my dad had got fired at the J.C. Penney store that he was running. So the family was out of options. We also had like a little ice cream store, old fashioned ice cream is what it was called. It was right up by Interstate. And that was not going to be enough income to sustain our big family. So my dad and mom made mainly my dad made the decision to take the life savings that we had and move us up to a little town right outside of Fargo called Barnesville, Minnesota, which most people have never heard of because it's really small, about 2,000 people roughly. And I only had one friend in high school, and happened to be a guy by the name of John Hanson. And John and I John got me introduced to smoking marijuana and drinking at 12 years of age. And that really started my journey downward from that point. I was starting high school with John doing that. John's older brother was killed in a drunk driving accident 1 year after John and I had met. And so we got closer. And then 2 years after that accident, my dad, at age 15 for me, died of a massive heart attack. And about 6 months after that happened to me, I was feeling so depressed and discouraged because my dad was everything to me that I attempted to take my own life. And that was the first of 2 suicide attempts in my life. So moving forward from there, just struggled to graduate high school with really bad grades because my attitude was so bad. And I tried college for 1 year. I flunked out of there. They had a program there where you could live in the state hospital and work on one of the patient floors for free rent as you went to college. So I did that. In that in that job, I was just amazed at how many people are institutionalized, and little did I know that that would come back later in my life. I myself got institutionalized many years later than that episode back in college, and to see it from both sides, both as a worker and then as a patient. So in the after college, I was out of options. I had my student loans to pay and I had burned all my bridges. So I wound up joining the Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force. This is in the mid 80s, in 1984 to be exact. And if you recall, that's when Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan were in power, and they did not have much tolerance for people that were smoking marijuana in the military, not like today. So I was kicked out about 2.5 years after joining, me and 11 other people, for smoking marijuana in the military. So now my life got even harder. I had to go from the Air Force back to Fargo Moorhead, and I just happened to run into a guy one night that was my good friend from college because he was my marijuana supplier. So he and I decided to rent a house together and grow high grade marijuana. And if you ever go on my sample chapters that I write about this on theguttergospel.com, this is the very first sample chapter that I give away to people for free. It talks about my manic break, and I've had several manic breaks over my life. And that's why these days I'm such a mental health advocate, is because of, going through those things. And like I said, even to the point of being institutionalized later in life. So that episode in 1988 this is 8 years after my dad died. He appeared to me in broad daylight. This is not a dream. This was nothing. I was sitting alone in the house and he appeared to me and said, "Mike, you're such a worthless this, that, and the other thing. Look at all the people driving by outside." And as I looked outside, I saw all the people that I'd ever hurt getting out of their cars and walking up towards the house saying, "Let's go watch this worthless piece of you know what blow his effing head off." And all of this torment was coming to me really hard and fast. And I felt all of it. So what happened was I got to the point where I was just getting bombarded with the voices from my past dad and all these people saying, "Kill yourself, kill yourself." And, I was trying to resist it. And all of a sudden, a big wind just kind of shoved me out of the front door of the house. And this is in the chapter. But anyway, so I wound up running like 3.5 blocks away from the house in broad daylight in my underwear, sweating profusely. And I just kind of came to all of a sudden. The voices stopped. I'm looking around and there's cars now, just real cars now, just looking at me kind of like, "What's going on here? This guy is just, something isn't right." But anyway, I returned to the house, put the shotgun in the garage, and just was sitting there by myself, listening to these voices and not knowing what to do, riding the storm out, so to speak. And what happened was a friend of mine that liked to come by every afternoon to get high with me stopped and goes, "Mike, what's wrong with you? You look like you saw a ghost or something," because he could see I was just terrified out of my mind. And I said, "I don't know what's going on, but all I know right now is I cannot get high today. I feel like I need to go to church," was my comment. And he said, "Church? Let me get something right with you, Mike, right here and now. I did not come here to get preached to. I came to see if you wanted to get high, and if you don't want to get high, I'm just going to stop coming." And that was the last I ever saw of him. So now we're into the late 80s, 89 now. I met my wife, who I'm still married to, because Donnie and I had a talk, and he said, "You need to talk to this power lifter at church named Wayne Johnson." And it was after getting introduced to Wayne that I became a born again Christian. And this happened September 8th of 1988 in a little non-denominational church up in North Moorhead. So now my life changed totally, from being a drug addict and doing all that to doing the church thing. So it was like a 180-degree turn. But little did I know that it wasn't enough to become just a believer, especially with somebody that's bipolar and has mental illness. And that's why such an advocate these days for mental health, because it seems like the two go hand in hand with the drug addiction and the mental health issues. So when you look around society today, Wesley, and you see kind of how everybody is dying in the streets of fentanyl and everything else, I think I'm kind of a timely voice in the wilderness saying, hey, you can go down a different path. You don't have to be hooked on drugs and hearing voices with all your mental health issues and stuff. Here's how you can get some help. I have help chapters on my book, or help tabs, I should say, up on the top of my website. Prayer lines in there. There's suicide prevention. There's everything. So now we're going forward in time, 11 years to be exact, from 88 to 1999. And this is the second sample chapter on my website. You can see it in there where it talks about my tour in hell, forever damned. And what that is in reference to is that in 1990s, in the mid 90s, I was going to college. I went back to school as an older student, and I got promoted up in the city transit system as I was going to school. So I went from being a dispatcher to a driver to the district management job, all within less than 2 years. So now I had like 26 employees underneath me, stressed like you couldn't believe. And I was just wanting answers how I could become a better manager. And I was looking at a TV show one night, an infomercial of Tony Robbins that came on, and he was talking about his personal power program. So I'm looking at it because I was in sales many years ago, and I thought, well, this is what I need. So I ordered the program because it had a 30-day money back guarantee. So I thought I have nothing to lose. I'll cram it all in a couple of weeks and I'll mail it back and get my money back. Anyway, that didn't work out too well for me because what happened was I did get the program. I did listen to it constantly. And that was my flaw with mental health issues to begin with, because now I'm low on sleep and I'm listening to these tapes over and over again. And here's the best part you'll get from that chapter. And this is what kind of changed my life in another turn during my course of my life. And it was talking about how I was driving back to work. My office was in downtown Fargo, and I live in West Fargo. So I'm on Main Avenue, rush hour traffic for lunch, and I'm listening to these voices kind of ask me a question. It sounded like a mix between God and Tony saying, what do you really want out of life, Mike? If you could have anything, what would you want the most? And I thought to myself, well, it'd be nice to have more money. And then the voice kind of said, no, that's not it. Then I said, well, maybe if I had more free time, or if I had this. And I just kept saying, no, no, no. And then finally, I get to the point on the drive back to the office where I'm crossing over Interstate 29 on Main Avenue, and the voice said, pull the car over and ask yourself this important question. What do you really want out of life? So I did that, and I'm stopped now. And the voice, I guess I said to myself, when it all shakes out, I just want acceptance. That's all I want is acceptance. And then the voice came to me, and it was just like God himself was talking to me. I had this tremendous peace flow over me. My mind was just clear. And the voice said, I do love you, Mike. I do accept you. And I died for you. Now go out and share that message with the world. Right. So what happened next was, Wesley, I got out of my car because I thought I was supposed to share that message right then and there. Because if you remember in 99, right before Thanksgiving, Y2K was going on. Everybody was thinking about what was going to happen with the computers. So I'm thinking that message meant I got to get out of my car now before when there's time and start telling people how much God loves them. So I did that. And I was stopping traffic and pounding on the hoods of cars saying, hey, repent. God loves you and accepts you and died for you. And pretty soon a cop pulls me over to the side, gets me out of traffic and says, hey, what's going on? So I'm trying to explain it to him. And he knew something was seriously wrong. So right away he asked me questions like, who do you know in town? And it just so happened that his boss was my brother-in-law, married to my little sister. So I gave him his name. And then I gave him my wife's name, who runs a really big nonprofit here in Fargo and has for years. And anyway, so he goes, okay, well, let's get you downtown and we'll have you examined. So that's what happened. And when they get me downtown, I started hearing all those godly voices from before turn very demonic. And the demonic voices were like lashing out accusations. You know how the Bible refers to the enemy of as the accuser of the brethren. Well, man, I tell you what, I felt that in spades, just like back in '88, right? And so I'm going through all of this and I'm thinking, well, I don't understand why I'm hearing all these voices turn so evil in the hospital. I thought it was something in the hospital. So I demanded that they said, you got to stay and spend the night because my wife said that she told them I hadn't been sleeping much and listening to these Tony Robbins tapes. So what happened next was I threatened to sue them all and say, I'm going to be getting out of here one way or the other. You're either going to release me against doctor's orders or I'm going to make life hell for you tonight. So they released me. And what happened next was I was home that night. I couldn't sleep. I was pacing. And the next morning, my wife said I was screaming out in torment. She said she could see me, my eyes roll back in my head as I'm out screaming in torment, flopping on the floor with all these demonic voices just tearing me apart in my head. And so then the ambulance comes. My 4-year-old son witnesses this. So it scarred him for life. It scarred all of us for life, mainly myself and my son, too. Still suffers from seeing that for years afterwards. I missed out on Thanksgiving because that was the day before Thanksgiving of 1999. And I spent 3 days in a padded cell in a straitjacket, bouncing off the walls, imagining what it would be like to be cast into hell with no hope of ever being redeemed and getting out of it. I felt the heat. I saw all the demonic imagery, and it reflected back to '88 when all those people were like wanting me to kill myself. This episode was as if I had died and what had happened to my soul for good. So as you can imagine, that left some big vacuums mentally, financially. I got ruined because I couldn't work at a job. My mind was all over the place. For 20 plus years, I didn't work a stable job after that. They fired me from the city transit system a few months after the episode, and I was a cab driver at night. I had to do all these bad jobs. And when I was driving a cab, that was my second suicide attempt because people would tease me at night and say, "What's wrong, loser? You can't find an actual real job," and stuff like that. So one night I decided I've had enough of this all. So I went down into my basement and I grabbed an electrical cord and I started to hang myself. And I remember this still quiet little voice saying, "Mike, your life still has a purpose," you know? And I was just sitting there in tears thinking about that. I just had to stop. And I didn't know it at the time what my purpose in life was. And it took me decades. It took me my entire life. I just turned 61 in October. So it took me 61 years to figure out what my purpose in life is. And it was nothing like I thought my purpose was going to be as I was growing up, because like I shared earlier, most people want either more money or more time or more this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, when you really shake it out, Wesley, I think it all comes down to focusing on how much God did for us at Calvary. My famous quote that I always give people, which is my favorite verse in the Bible, it says in Revelations 12:11, overcome by the blood of the Lamb, Christ did the work, and the word of our testimony. And I can see you shaking your head. And that's it, guys. We are here to share our testimony with this hurting world, which has never been so hurting as it is today. It gets worse and worse, as we all know, as time progresses until the end. So we're here to resonate those voices as loud as we can and to amplify them to this hurting world and say, you know what? Christ did it on the cross. I'm not perfect. You know, when people ask me, well, how long have you been sober? Or how long have you done this? Or how long have you done that? I say, well, you know what the truth is, guys? We're all sinners that have fallen short of the glory of God. And that does not say that I'll share this story with you, which kind of answers the question on sobriety, which is almost 6 years now. But anyway, there was this guy in one of my treatment centers I was at that was telling the story to all these veterans. And he said, well, I got sober with my neighbor and we were sober together for over 30 years, right? And then he fell off the wagon one day and was dead within a year and a half. He had drank himself to death. So when I share that story, it's for a reason. It's to say, whether you've been sober a day, 6 months, 6 years, 30 years, or whatever, you got a message, and your message is that if you believe in Jesus Christ and what he did for you at Calvary, share that message with the world as a broken soul and say, hey, here's my favorite saying, Wesley. I always say, I'm just a broken toy, that needs fixing just like everybody else does. You know, I happen to have a great ministry now that resonates with a lot of people because everybody can relate to being in the gutter, in life, whether it is through when they went through high school years or whatever, just growing up in this fallen world. There's no such thing as perfect parents, perfect families, perfect anything. There's just broken people and broken toys all over humanity. And we got to point the way to those broken people and say, there's hope through all the struggles. I'll share this with you guys because this kind of gives you an idea of how many and how severe my struggles were on top of everything I've already shared. I had to live in 2 different homeless shelters from the military. I had to have 2 civil commitments placed on me in 2 states, North Dakota and Minnesota. I had to stand trial after I was institutionalized. What they would do in the state institution, and I spent time in 2 jails, they would take me from Jamestown, North Dakota, 100 miles straight west from Fargo. So I was out there by myself, no friends, everything's been stripped away now. And they said, well, Mike, we're going to take you every week from here to Fargo. And they would put me in chains and shackles in the back of a paddy wagon. Talk about uncomfortable, right? And they would take me to stand trial before judges. And I remember I couldn't even speak. I was just like, I was just shaking my head when I would get in front of the judge. I couldn't defend myself. I was just in tears thinking, what crime did I commit to be in this place? I didn't kill anybody. I didn't even rob anybody. Why am I here? And that's how severe my mental illness was. And fast forwarding through time, I got my medications balanced now. So I went from being institutionalized and through all those trials. And when I look back on my life, I can remember one thing that really stuck with me. There was this show, a Christian radio show called the Minrith Meyer Clinic that was on in the 1990s. And I had a route that I would drive back then before I got to the transit system job. So I was listening to those guys every day. And one of them said to the co-host, his partner, saying, Frank, I've got 7 kids and all of them are high achievers in their fields, except my second youngest boy who's bipolar. But he said, you know what? There's something about him, Frank, and that is that I think one day in the future, he's going to outshine the rest of those guys, those doctors and lawyers and stuff by far. I just see something about him, and that is kind of where I'm at in today's world. I have bypassed my lovely sister, who's a doctor, and all my other siblings that are all high achievers, and I'm the bipolar one. And that's why that resonates with me so much. I have spoke in over 180 countries now. I've been speaking on every continent from the comfort of my own bedroom in my sweats and unshaven and shaggy, but living the comfortable life, not because I have any money, but because it's about my heart and how I have that burning heart for the hurting people that have been through the gutter in life, just like I have. And I'll share this with you guys. There's a donate tab. If you have the need or desire to donate to me, what I'm going to share with you next is what I shared with Wesley before we came on air. Those donations go to help feed the Seeds of Hope food pantry here in Dilworth, Minnesota. I was able to, after I got an article published on me in the Fargo Forum up here, to raise enough money for them to get them 2 new refrigerators and a new freezer within a month for my speaking engagements on these podcasts. So those donations are greatly needed. I'm doing everything, financing everything on my podcasting appearances on my disability check from the military so I could use the donations. If you want to pick up a copy of my book, there's that's available on my homepage for $7.99. I just got that published this year out in New York by Brooklyn Publishers. Feel free to pick up a copy of that. They did a great job kind of helping me finish that project. And that has all the ups and downs in it. There's a particular chapter I'm really proud of called The Sea of Tears. It's on pages 70 through 75, and it shares a lot about what I've just shared with you guys today about the broken world and how Christ really looks at us. And Christ appeared to me in a dream one night, and that's in the Sea of Tears chapter. So I always ask people, go through there if you don't want to spend time reading the whole book, because that alone is worth the $8. And I'll leave it there, Wesley.
Man, Mike, you have talked about so much, and honestly, my head's just kind of spinning. Like, just your testimony is so awesome about how God has worked it in your life. And I love how you brought out the scripture where it talks about, how powerful your testimony is, because it's so real. A lot of people, I feel like they talk and they're like, they think to themselves that my story isn't good enough to be shared. It can't help anybody. And
Right.
if you're listening and that's you and you're like, my testimony isn't worth anything, that's exactly what the enemy wants you to hear. That's exactly
Yep.
what the enemy wants you to know.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
testimony may be the exact thing that somebody else needs to hear in order to unlock their jail cell and step into freedom. And
Yeah.
so I love that you brought that up, because that's what this show is all about. As
Yeah.
humans, as just regular old humans, everyday Joes, if you will, we all wear masks every single day. We put
That's
on the
right.
mask that we're fine when inside we're not. And
Yeah.
this show is about those types of people coming forward and saying, hey, you know what? I'm not fine, and that's okay. Here's what's going on in my life, and here is how God has used me. Because it's so important that we do that. And if we have to do that in order to begin to experience the freedom and the grace that God has given us.
Very well said.
You describe your journey as moving from gutter to grace. When you look back at your lowest point in your life, what was the moment or realization that made you believe that redemption was actually possible?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. To be honest with you, there were several. I think it was my wife, being with me at ground zero, seeing me throughout all those hard times, and my son, and just loving on me and saying, and my, God bless my mother in law, man. I tell you what, you talk about a prayer warrior. She just passed away at 93 years of age this past May, and never really saw the whole thing take off. But every time I go see her, she'd be encouraging me and praying for me and just sharing about the love God has for me. So, she was with me on that journey. And I would always go back to, if you want one, I think it would be when I was in the state institution. I remember this plaque on the wall that said, I was just in tears thinking to myself, like I shared earlier, why am I here, out here in the middle of nowhere by myself? And it said, as I look up at the plaque, it was just saying to me, we've been given this life. You've been given this life because you're strong enough to live it. And I'd never seen that or heard that before. And I just kind of was sitting there thinking about it. And it was like, you're right. If the more I thought about that, it was like, maybe there is hope for me. I don't see it yet. There was another example I can share with you about us when I was on a psych unit before the homeless shelters. I became friends with this guy on the psych unit, and he said, there's something about you, Mike. I don't know what it is, but you remind me a lot of Job in the Bible, because you lost everything, right? And you don't have any friends or anybody around you anymore. And now you're going to be put out in the middle of nowhere in a homeless shelter, and I just see God bringing everything back like a trillion fold in your life someday in the future. And this was, let's see, this was in 2019 when I got institutionalized. So there was that, there was the plaque, there was the conversation I shared with you about the little boy that's bipolar and how he's outshining the rest of them. And then there was a story, another one before I even became a believer. And I look back on my life now and I write about all these in the book about this little old lady coming up to me as I was being kicked out of the military. They were humiliating me, my branch I was associated with, or I should say my unit. And anyway, so I was part of the hospital unit. They had me up on the hospital waxing ambulances and out in the hot Texas sun in the middle of the summer. So anyway, I'm doing that, and this little old lady just comes to me out of nowhere and hands me a Bible tract, asks my name. So I'm talking to her for a couple of minutes. I start reading what she gave me, and I said, I cannot accept this from you. And she looks at me and she goes, Well, Mike, why can't you accept that? And I said, Because as I've been reading this, I just got to be honest with you and say, I'm not a Christian. I'm an alcoholic and I'm a drug addict. And worse yet, I'm getting kicked out of here in 2 or 3 days, and the only reason I'm here right now is because they're trying to humiliate me, and I don't know where I'm gonna go after I leave here. And she goes, Mike, I'm just so glad that I ran into you today and that you shared that with me because God loves sinners. And she's going on and on, right? I'm thinking to myself, how do I dare tell this lady it's just going in one ear and out the other? But anyway, so Wesley, there were so many people, like I said, her, my mother-in-law, my wife, all of the people on my wife's side of the family are very strong believers. So it's funny because when I got married on my side of the church, there was hardly anybody in it, right? And on her side of the church was packed with all of her relatives, and all the overflow from her side of the family was sitting on my side. But anyway, that kind of sums it all up, how we are blessed. All of us are blessed. We all have gifts, we all have talents that God's given us. And I always share this on the shows is that, we can have identical twins that are different as night is to day because they are not given the exact same talents. And no one person is identical to another on the planet. And last I heard, there was around 8 billion, give or take, people. So, if we're all individuals, well, what is it about the individual that's so great that God blessed you with those abilities? And I say this also in the shows, which is that I spoiled the Purpose Driven Life book because I've read it. And at the end of it, the purpose of your life is to go out and evangelize. It's to go out and carry out the Great Commission. That's why we're all here with our talents, our gifts that God has given us individually. It might be that you're an athlete, a writer, a singer, whatever the talent is, use it to the best of your ability to evangelize to one person. It doesn't have to be like Mike going out to all countries and all continents and everything, but you can reach one, you know what I mean? And in the parable of the muddy penny, the Sea of Tears chapter, that's exactly what that chapter is all about. It's about how Christ appeared to me and said, just reach one. And my best friend nowadays is another veteran out in Bismarck. And he said, Mike, what would you like to be put on your headstone once you pass away? And I said, nothing about being the author of the gutter gospel or anything like that. But I want on my headstone, Mike reached one. That's what I want. Mike reached one.
Man, I love that. That is so good. That's so good. And I love the story that you shared about the lady that came and handed you that track. And you said it,
Yeah.
you said it's going in one ear and out the other. But Mike, as you're sharing that, man, I can tell you right now, it did not go in one ear and out the other. In the moment, you may have been thinking it, but it's those moments that I think something took root, something caught, and lingered around. There was a seed planted there.
Yeah.
And I think that happens. We sometimes I feel like we don't go and we don't talk to somebody because we're afraid that they're just going to ignore us and it's going to go in one ear and out the other. And
Yeah.
it's not up to us to make that decision. It's our job to follow the guidance that's being put on our heart to talk to this person, and then let God deal with what sticks around in or doesn't stick around in their lives. Because man, I just wow. You've talked about your battle with addiction and mental illness and periods of deep chaos. And how did faith become a stabilizing force for you when everything else just fell out of control?
Well, after I got out of the homeless shelters and did get my disability checks from the military, I joined up with the jail chaplain ministry in Fargo, which we have not talked about yet. And those guys are very good about having small men's groups And, as you shared before we started recording today about Celebrate Recovery, I do one here that, and I also do another one called Life Recovery, which is similar. It just reads out of the Life Recovery Bible, and I do those groups. I lead them most Thursday nights across the river over in Moorhead at Salem. But yeah, so you get into the small groups, and that's really kind of what I would encourage people to do these days is to get involved in the community and say, you know what, man, I am broken, but there's so much help out there now these days that was not available when I was going through my struggles, like 988 and, resources like that for people that can just reach out. As we know, the internet has both good and bad points, but the good is that there's instant help for people if they really seek it to get taken care of so that they do not have to go through all of the things Mike had to endure in his life. So I'm encouraged by that. As much as the enemy might be on the prowl and ramping things up, God's still in control, and he's got the final victory. So, with that in mind, that's how I really kind of look at my life these days is it's in control. He's still on the throne, and Satan can only do so much before either we're all called home or we're left here to share our testimony and our ministry with hurting people.
That's so good. Yeah, I love Celebrate Recovery. It's an awesome ministry. I'm blessed to have it in my life and to be a part of it, to be a leader of it myself. And if you're out there struggling right now and you're listening to our conversation and you have nowhere to go, you have no one to talk to, man, I just encourage you to find a Celebrate Recovery meeting near you and go. You can go to CR Locators for Celebrate Recovery, crlocator.com. Plug in your zip code and it'll tell you the closest one, when they meet, where they meet, all the information that you need. I guarantee you'll walk in and be loved and not judged.
It's,
So, and a big part of having our story and helping other people is talking to people that you can relate to. And so, Mike, as an Air Force veteran myself, thank you for your service. It was pretty cool when I found out that you were Air Force veteran because you're the first Air Force veteran that I know of that's been on the show. So it's cool to have you on from that aspect alone. But part of your heart is for veterans that are struggling.
yeah.
What unique challenges do you see veterans facing in recovery, and how does your story help connect with them on a deeper level?
Well, I don't know if you can read this here, but this says 22 veterans per day on my custom shirts and hoodies. And I get those out of Custom Ink out in Virginia. They do good work. But to answer your question about the veterans, that 22 veterans per day, and it kind of varies from time to time, goes a little lower, goes a little higher during the holidays, as you know, that there's a lot of people that do not understand how hard it is for veterans to transition back into civilian life. And I'm trying to bring awareness to that. And I have invited a lot of veterans that I've run into at the VA to the small groups to try and kind of do it on my own to bridge that gap. But then we're also doing that in other communities where we reach one. I hand out the wristbands that say theguttergospel.com with the crosses on them. And that starts the conversation to hand those not just to veterans, but to anybody. Before we end here today, I wanted to mention also, as you were talking about how to get help, I go on all these shows and reach out and say, if you cannot find people, you don't feel comfortable calling 988 or whatever, after listening to my story, reach out to me personally and I respond to those emails on my downtime. And that email is easy to remember. It's just mike@theguttergospel.com. So you'll see that in the show notes. I get back to you. I read out of the Life Recovery Bible every morning. Then I go into those emails and start responding to them to get them the help they need. So I'm kind of a one-man operation, but it fills all my 6 days a week and then church on Sundays doing all that, responding to people and going on shows. I don't host my own show. I just appear on others, but I don't, discourage anybody to say if they want to start their own show, I can help them like we talked a little bit about before we started to record today. So there's so much that I'm trying to do with everybody that I need a team. So that's kind of where I'm headed in the future, is that I'm building a team of believers and ideally veterans as well. They don't have to be, but solid Christians that just have a heart after God that want to reach the lost world.
Man, That's awesome. I love your heart for reaching people and reaching veterans, and just the heart that you're sharing with us. It's so powerful. You know, shame can be a really powerful prison for people to live in.
Yeah.
What helped you confront the shame of your past? And what would you say to somebody who is still feeling disqualified by the things that they've done and living in that prison of shame?
Well, I shared the one Bible verse about Revelations 12:11 about your testimony, but another one, and this is at my lowest, one of my lowest points too. My wife goes, "Well, let's just open up the Bible and see what it says." And it just happened to land on chapter 40, verse 1 of Psalms. And in there it says that I pulled you out of the miry pit. In there you can insert shame of whatever, right? And put your feet on a sure foundation, which we all know is Christ. So if God pulled us out of that miry pit, it's our responsibility then to not only share our testimony, but to get fed every day and say, okay, God, open up this. In my example is I read out of the Life Recovery Bible as a recovering addict, because it talks in there about kind of how it ties into recovery, and Celebrate Recovery and Life Recovery Bible have a lot to kind of interchange with each other. So that's kind of why I read out of the Life Recovery Bible. But I just look at it this way, that if we're still here and we got breath in our lungs, we need to be praising God and thanking him and helping the people that we can every day that we have available. And because I'm retired military now, I've got a lot of free time on my hands, so I can help a lot of people. And it goes back to what I said earlier about my tombstone, just reach one. You don't have to reach the world, just reach one. So, but yeah, I remember being in the grocery store the other day and handed one of these wristbands out to a guy behind me, and it's kind of like the Bible track story. He goes, "Well, what's this? I can't accept it. It looks too religious." Right? And I'm like, well, if you knew the truth about the gutter gospel, it's kind of it has the faith stories in it, but so does the story about being in the first bloody gutter and the gutter in life for many decades and all the other stuff as well. So I think there's takeaways in there for just about anybody.
So you talk a lot about finding purpose again, right? And rebuilding your life. What did rebuilding your identity look like? You know, not just breaking free from addiction and your mental health, but really learning who you are in Christ.
Man, that's a good question. I think the more you read, the more you get that identity of who you are in Christ. And in the back of the Life Recovery Bible, they break it out by topics. As this just happens to be, we just finished one on trust, how we can trust God. And the very first example we see of that in the Bible, of course, is the story of Abraham with his son, right? And how God tested him was testing how much Abraham would trust him to provide, right? And of course, we know the story about how God did provide for Abraham with the animal in the bush. I'm kind of drawing a blank, but anyway, you get the point. It's like we were reading all the trust chapters, and now we're doing one on humility, right? So you can go through topic by topic, either humility, trust, faith, pride, shame, or any of them in there. It's all covered in the Bible. And you just got to open it up. I got a good friend of mine I shared with you before we came on air that passed away this last December, and we had a saying that went, break open the book before you break open the bottle or pill case or whatever. Break open the book and read about it, because God's got the answer for you before you have to get back into your addiction and your isolation and all the other stuff. And I saw, when we're talking about the addiction piece of it, I saw this interview that Matthew Perry, the guy that just passed away a year or two ago, that was on Friends. He did an interview about a year before his death or so with Diane Sawyer, and he said, secrets and alone time kill people like me. And that's very well said. It did kill him. Little did he know that that would be the words that people remembered him by, like a year later. That when that interview came out, of course, nobody knew at the time that he was really struggling as bad as he was, but it took him out, and addiction takes out so many people. And as we saw just over the last several years, all of the drugs pouring over the border and everything that, we got to know that God's still on the throne. And the only way we can combat that is to be studying his word every day.
Yeah, I like that phrase. Break open the book before you break open the insert here. I like that.
Yeah.
That's really good. And those words, I often talk about when I do podcast interviews and even here on Unmasked when I'm talking with people, one of the things that I often talk about is the importance of community in your life.
Right.
Because when you're dealing with something, whether it's addiction or it's something as simple as low self-esteem or anything like that, really, when you're alone, you are setting yourself up to be bombarded by the enemy. You are giving yourself space for him to speak into you in a not healthy way. And it's important that you have community of people around you that can speak life into you and can support you and be there and encourage you. And because I honestly feel like boredom is one of the chief triggers for
Yeah.
anybody dealing with anything, because when
Yeah.
you're bored, it's very easy to go, well, I'm just going to go back into X, Y, or Z
XYZ.
because I know what it is and it may not be long term, but at least it gives me something to do for a few minutes.
Right.
And so that's really powerful. And I love that you shared that. For the listeners out there who feel lost, they feel hopeless or they're convinced that they're just too far gone. What is one truth that you want them to walk away with from your story today?
The one truth I would share is name for me one person that you know of. Let me back up one step. Put my testimony through all the filters. Okay, first off, how many veterans do you know that have 100% service rating from the military? I can give you that number. It's 20% or less, or around 20%. Okay. Then, so that's rare, right? That out of all the people that first served in the military and from the general public, that's another filter totally, right? The military community is very small compared to the overall population of the country. So right there, that's one filter. Then you get into the disability rating. Then you get into the 2 suicide attempts survivor mode. Then you get into how many people lived also through all that, the 2 homeless shelters, 2 civil commitments, 2 jails, 2 and to the institution to be institutionalized and live to tell about it and have a testimony. I can give you the answer. You're looking at them. There's one, right? That's the way you got to look at it. That you're the one guy or lady that has your testimony. It doesn't have to be Mike's testimony. It's your story. Everybody's got your unique story that can reach one. That's what I want to get across.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's such a powerful thing to walk away with. You're unique. And it's like we shared earlier, it only takes you being willing to open up to reach that one person and
Yeah.
help them to find freedom just by
Yeah.
taking that one small step and encouraging them.
Yeah, my mother-in-law that I was sharing with you about, she said, Mike, she shared this with me a couple months before she passed away. She goes, there's not much I can do with my life anymore because I've lived all my life and it's all behind me now. And I'll share this with you. The one thing I can still do is I can still be an encourager, right? From her nursing bed. And she said, because there's some people in here that work with me that have to bathe me and do some very unpleasant things. And I appreciate them so much. And I want to be an encourager for them because it's not always an easy job to do. So I'd like to leave you with that thought. You can be an encourager for one other person, and that will open the door for you guys to start talking.
That is a good word to end on. Well, Mike, I thank you so much for being with us today here on Unmasked and sharing your story about where you've come from and where God has brought you. What a powerful story it was. And I just can't wait to get this out and for listeners to be able to hear it. If you liked Mike and you heard his story and you want to know more about him or you want to reach out to him, feel free to go down in the show notes. I'll have the links available there. And there's ways to contact me as well if you need somebody to talk to. Like Mike, I'm here and I want to help if I can. Thanks for joining me today on Unmasked. If this episode encouraged you, Would you take a moment to follow, rate, and share it with somebody who you think could benefit from hearing it? For more encouragement and information on having me speak at your church or events and my coaching services, visit wesleyfarnsworth.com. And don't forget to connect with me on social media. Until next time, remember that grace is greater than your past, and freedom begins when we all live unmasked. God bless you.